When the HOA president broke onto my ranch and attacked my dog in a blind rage, seconds became forever. I fired once, not out of vengeance, but to stop the assault. The aftermath wasn't a movie. It was blue lights, a courtroom, and a moral reckoning that would change my life and my neighbors forever. The ranch had belonged to my family for generations. The fence posts leaned with age, the windmills creaked in summer, and the barn smelled like hay and diesel and the years of work it took to keep things running. I'd moved back to take care of it after my father died, to keep wolves from the flock, keep the tractors tuned, and to teach my daughter Ellie how to rope and mend fences. Everything was quiet until the development went in across the valley. New houses snapped like a string of freshly hung shirts along the ridge, and with them came a homeowners association determined to make the world look the way their brochures said it should. That's when Marion Hale arrived in our lives, the HOA president, clipboard in her hand and a civil restraining order on her smile. We'd clashed over small things at first, a notice about visual intrusion because my hay bales were visible from the road, a complaint about a homemade sign I'd stapled to my gate. I answered each letter with a deed copy or a county map and enough patience to make a saint nervous. She'd escalate. I'd respond. The neighborhood watched and gossiped, then tired of our back and forth and stopped paying attention until the night it turned physical. It was late February and the snow had mostly melted into mud. Ellie was at her mother's for the week. I was out checking a blind near the north pasture when the dog started barking, a sharp, frantic sound that cut through the valley. I didn't recognize the pattern. This was not coyotes or a stray. The pack ran toward the gate full of hot barking, and I saw a silhouette moving like someone who thought a gate was merely a suggestion. By the time I hit the porch lights, I could make out Marion's figure. She was in a heavy coat, shoulders hunched like someone bracing for a crowd. Two men in hoodies lingered behind her on the gravel. She had no business there. The HOA's reach ended at the county road. I called out before she reached the dog run. "Marion, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer. She moved past the wind chime and toward the fenced run where Milo, my dog, 15 years old and stubborn as a mule, was pacing like a coiled spring. Milo loved visitors in daylight, but not the way this woman was moving. Sharp, invasive, hands ready. "Get back," I said. "You're trespassing." Her shoulders tightened. "This land has been disrupting the view corridor," she snapped. "You've had years of notice. We're reclaiming community easements tonight." She always had a phrase for everything. Tonight it was reclaiming. Tonight she'd chosen confrontation. When Milo barked and put himself between her and the lambing shed, Marion lunged forward. She grabbed the dog's collar with a ferocity that surprised me. It was like she wanted to hurt the calm, not just control it. Milo yelped and twisted. I moved faster than I thought I could. "Let go," I barked. She didn't. Her hands were on Milo's throat, and there was a flash of something in her face I'd only seen in courthouse photos. People like her got angry when they were losing control, and losing control made them dangerous. I went for her from behind, expecting her to stop when she saw the person she'd been tormenting on paper and phone calls for 3 years. Instead, she turned and swung. She came at me with an elbow and a voice that had an animal in it. I pushed her away. She stumbled back and then lunged again, faster this time, fingers clawing for my face. There was a moment of pure reflex, a flinch into the shed where the old Colt 38 sat in a cabinet behind a box of feed. I didn't plan it. I didn't weigh consequences. I grabbed it to keep her off my property. She was on Milo again. Milo's yelp was sharp and terrible. My heart hammered so loud it filled my ears. I pointed the gun down, not to hurt, only to warn. "Back away," I said, voice breaking with something that might have been fear. She didn't. She shoved the dog harder and reached for me. The world narrowed to the snap of breath and the sliding of leather on my palm. The shot was a single, terrible punctuation. Marion collapsed with a wet sound onto the packed earth. Milo whimpered, stuck his nose against her shoulder, and nosed the wet spot like he didn't understand the significance of it yet. For a long moment, there was only the wind and the dogs. I dropped the revolver and walked to her, calling for help, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line, to to secure the scene. The men who'd been with Marion fled into the black, sprinting away into the valley. When the sheriff arrived, it was with a dozen questions, lights and shoes, and a quiet that felt like the edge of a storm. I told the truth. She'd come onto my property. She grabbed my dog. She came at me. The weapon had been in the box since my father's time. I'd never intended to end a life. I only wanted to stop the attack. They put me in the back of a cruiser. The deputy's eyes were tired, but not unkind. "You did what you thought you had to," he said. "We'll sort it." Even as I answered the questions, my hand smelled of oil and hay and something else I couldn't name. I kept thinking about Ellie, about Milo, about what would happen next, not only in the courtroom but in my bones, where sleep would not come the same. In the days that followed, the ranch felt like a place people visited briefly and then left alone, the way a crime scene waits for the coroner. Deputies came daily, combing for prints, sketches, and statements. Neighbors wandered near the property line with sympathetic eyes and hushed whispers. News vans from town took angles, and I signed releases until my wrist ached. Marion's husband, who I barely knew, arrived with a face that belonged on a wanted poster of grief and fury. The initial report was complicated. Marion had been a public figure in the small valley, organized fundraisers, chaired events, the woman who'd written letters to redraft bylaws. Her presence on my ranch the night she died was unambiguous trespass. Her actions, grabbing Milo and turning violent, were corroborated by Milo's bloodied collar and the bruise marks the attending deputy documented. Eyewitnesses were thin, but the men with her, volunteers from the HOA, had scattered when the gun went off. The sheriff's office took statements from everyone who saw the run-in. They took Milo to a vet to document injuries. They photographed Marion's wounds and collected toxicology samples. They brought in the county prosecutor to assess whether charges should be filed, and if so, what kind. The first week was a blur of interviews. I told the truth every time. She lunged, she attacked Milo. I fired in fear and to stop the assault. The deputy who had been first on scene, a man named Ruiz, was a calm professional who had seen more violence than the rest of the town combined. He told me privately, "You'll have to make a case that this was defensive. The physical evidence helps, but so does intent." Intent. That was the hinge on which my entire life would swing. The prosecutor, when she finally came out to the ranch for a look, asked the hard questions. Was there a history of provocation? Had you threatened her before? Why did you keep a weapon in the house? Did you try to retreat, to call for help before shooting? I answered honestly. I'd not called. The sheriff, because she'd acted fast. Retreating wasn't possible without Milo being harmed. The gun was kept for property defense, and there were coyotes and rustlers in the region. I gave them photos of my gates and posted signs warning of private property. I gave them a timeline of Marion's prior harassment, the letters, and the calls. Public reaction split the town. Some called me a hero for defending my dog and homestead. Others printed the photo of Marion smiling at a fundraiser and called me a murderer. The HOA put out a statement calling the event tragic and requesting privacy. Marion's family demanded justice. The county prosecutor said they were open to pursuing involuntary manslaughter if the evidence suggested an unjustified use of deadly force. The sheriff's office reviewed Marion's phone records and the movement logs from the gate cameras. They found communications detailing the HOA's activities that night. It appeared Marion had not been alone in deciding to confront me. The two men who had accompanied her, men who'd been linked with other disruptive incidents around the lake, were sought for questioning. One turned himself in, the other left the county. I spent hours with the prosecutor's team. We replayed the security video 100 times, my back porch light, the shadow of Marion's approach, the hand on Milo's collar. A forensic analyst pointed out that strong men often don't leave the same pattern of bruises on a dog as a lover's tug. Milo's neck showed abrasion consistent with being grabbed, not merely pulled on. The analyst's opinion was measured but clear. There was force on the dog that would reasonably alarm any caretaker. Still, the law is not merely a ledger of facts. It's also story, context, and thresholds of reasonable action. My attorney, a careful woman named Beth, made sure my every reply was recorded, every alibi corroborated. She told me the way she tells clients about storms: prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and document everything in between. When the county grand jury convened, the case was on a knife edge. Marion's family pushed for indictment. The prosecutor, after reviewing the testimony and evidence, decided the jury should decide. I was arraigned on a charge: manslaughter in the heat of passion. It wasn't murder, but it wasn't exoneration either. The bail was set, and the news cycle that had simmered in our valley found itself boiling. The trial date loomed. In the meantime, men from the HOA returned to the red-swept parking lot at the community center and begged for donations and petitions to pay legal fees for Marion's family. My mailbox filled with anonymous notes, some hateful, some supportive. On the worst nights, I dreamed of Marion's face in the wet earth where she fell, and I woke with my hands smelling of gun oil and hay. Ellie returned for the preliminary hearings. She sat quietly, fists clenched so tight her knuckles blanched white. She wanted to talk to me about the ethics of what happened, about whether a father who shot someone could still teach his child right from wrong. I had no answer. The courtroom was a small stone building that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. The jury was made of people who ate at the same diner we did and watched the same little league games. The prosecutor painted a picture of an HOA warrior who'd been pushed too far. My defense painted an old rancher who'd been forced to choose in a single terrifying moment. We called witnesses who testified to Marion's pattern. The letters, the times she'd stood by my gate filming my property, the witness who'd seen her yank on Milo's collar in the dark 2 weeks prior. We also called the deputy who'd been first on scene. He provided the timeline and the physical evidence. The prosecution tried to show that I had other options, that I might have retreated, that calling 911 would have been the lawful route. My attorney countered with the immediacy of the threat. Milo's life was in the balance. When the jury retired, Ellie squeezed my hand until I felt the bones. We waited for hours. Townspeople crowded the hallways. Some offered sympathetic nods, others avoided my gaze. The jurors returned, the foreperson stood, and the judge asked for the reading of the verdict. Not guilty of manslaughter, the foreperson said. The words felt strange and hollow and blessed all at once. The courtroom released a sound like a breath exhaled. Some wept, some clapped softly. Marion's family bowed in private anguish. It didn't erase their hurt. It didn't make her walking onto my property anything less than the tragic chain of events that it had been. Legally, the verdict cleared me. Emotionally, the work had just begun. There were civil suits. Marion's family filed a wrongful death claim. The HOA considered adding trespass damages and public safety fines. The county ordered mediation. The neighborhood fractured into camps. Those who believed in defending one's home at all costs, and those who thought community leaders must never be allowed to die in confrontations with private citizens. I went back to the ranch and painted the gate again. The dog slept curled by the stove. Ellie and I planted a small maple where the disturbance had started, a living thing to mark a night of terrible happenstance. I started going to therapy because I understood finally that surviving something didn't mean it wouldn't leave a scar you had to learn to look at. The recurring nightmares faded slowly. Sleep became something I worked for. In the years that followed, the HOA dissolved into a quieter group of neighbors who met over potlucks instead of bylaws. Many of Marion's harsher policies were repealed, but no victory could bring her back. Her death was a wound in the community, one that surfaced sometimes like a bruise when someone new proposed overreach. People told the story differently, depending on which side of the valley they lived on. To some, I was a hero. To others, a man capable of ending a life. I never stopped missing the innocence of the ranch days. Milo aged and grew slower. Ellie learned to drive the old pickup and took over chores. I taught her what to do if someone threatened livestock: call, document, and, if possible, retreat. I also taught her how to feel a weight, how to carry it without letting it break her. The shooting left me different. Not worse, not better, simply different. I stood up for what I loved and, in the process, changed the town's understanding of boundaries. The law had spoken, and it had found that my action in that moment was defensible. But legality isn't the same as moral ease. I live with that difference. Once, on a quiet evening, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years walked by the fence. He nodded at me, looked past me at the darkening line of trees, and said, "I still don't know if I'd have done what you did," I answered. "No one ever does until they have to." He walked on. The dogs barked at the dusk. I went back to work in the barn, mended a fence runner, and fixed the mower blade. The ranch went on. So did life. And somewhere between the hay and the horizon, I learned that protection sometimes arrives wrapped in grief, and that living with the consequences is its own kind of courage.